Good evening, my fellow infected psychopaths. Today I'll be injecting you with the insanity that is my voice. Let's get started. After spending days, nights slaving away, testing and experimenting, I made my first working prototype. This weapon combines all the mechanical components from the last design before, but altered for this design. I took the spring toggle switch mechanism from the previous version and integrated it into the new design. And if you're curious about how that works, then I highly recommend checking out my previously made video on this weapon. I also changed the spool reel system. Instead of the spool reel pointing up, it's instead facing the back of the weapon. This helps make the weapon look a little less bulky. Just like in the previous design, it uses fiddle block pulleys to move the sling carrier bolt back and forth along a set of 4 guide rails. Which reminds me, the guide rails have been altered slightly to be able to take the strain of the elastic cord. To give you a brief summary on this reasoning, the weapon works on the idea that when a new projectile is chambered, the motor will be set on reverse thanks to the spring toggle switch that is in between 2 limit switches. When the motor is in reverse, the elastic cord will pull the sling bolt carrier force until it hits the mechanism attached to the trigger, which will then push out. It will then release the projectile and sling, firing the weapon. This mechanism is good and well, but there's a lot of tension in the elastic cord, which is why there's 2 sets of guide rails, and unlike my last version, the guide rails are steel instead of brass. This is for extra strength. Side note, I made 2 specialized parts from poster board and superglue that have been layered together to make stronger pieces. This also helps to make sure that the gun doesn't rip itself apart from the elastic cord. Another noteworthy feature of the weapon is the sling carrier. To give you a quick rundown on this mechanism, the mechanism is a split sling bolt type. My invention, by the way. You see, how it works is this mechanism is split into 2 parts. Part 1 is the actual sling carrier that carries the sling / rubber band. Part 2 acts like a moving roof for the projectiles. When part 1 is moved, it will eventually collide into part 2. This will cause both parts to move as one. When both parts reaches a certain point, the weapon will push on a lever that's connected to an armature, which will then push a projectile from the magazine through a ramp-like structure to under and in front of the sling. A trigger will block both projectile and sling. When I move part 1 forward, it will drag part 2 forward thanks to a Technic pin at the beginning of part 2. Part 2 will act like a roof for the projectile. It ensures that the sling and projectile doesn't go up and over the trigger. When part 1 is dragging part 2 forward, a string tied to the mentioned lever will get pulled, causing the lever and armature to be put back in its original position. This string will also act like a stopping point. That way part 1 doesn't pull part 2 too far along. I should also mention, the string has to be a certain length, which can make trying to tie and keeping the exact length a bit tricky. To solve this issue, I use a bolt that I push through a Technic hole that I then use a nut to tighten the bolt. This same string is then wrapped around the bolt, then tightened with the mentioned bolt. This allows me to have the correct or even adjust the lengths of string. When the trigger is pulled, the sling will fling the projectile out, firing the weapon. Okay, now that you know how this mechanism works, it's time that I explain to you what I did to make this version different. In my last prototype, part 1 had these walls that was made up of Technic bricks and plates. In between the walls there are 3 pulleys that act like part of a fiddle block system. The problem was that the part of the wall where the sling loops through will break because the force of the sling repeatedly hitting it when it was being fired. Another issue was that the walls kept coming apart. The walls were glued together, and keep in mind, there's a lot of tension being put on part 1 of the sling carrier. There was a solution, and that was 3D printing. Now, I don't own a 3D printer, nor do I know how to use one, but luckily, there are businesses out there that you can pay to 3D print for you if you send them the model files. With that said, I searched for what I wanted on 3D printed model sites like Thingiverse, until I found something. I discovered a model of a specialized LEGO Technic piece that was perfect for my applications. Now that I had the model, I guess that means I can just go on JLPCB and use their 3D printing services, and simply get my model printed and sent to me. Right?
Your bill, sir.
What? $100? Well, this can't possibly be correct.
Oh, my mistake, sir. Thank you for pointing that out. This is your bill.
Was the funny looking orange man putting tears on everything? Shit outside the US is expensive as hell. And guess where JLPCB is located? It certainly isn't across the street. So I did what any other person would do. I went to the forums, and I discovered a small business that's located in the US. This company is called Forge Solutions, and it has been so helpful in my project. Like seriously, even if you're not into LEGO gunsmithing, but want custom LEGO parts or any other 3D prints, I highly recommend checking them out. I'm not sponsored by them, but I really do feel like they should get more support and customers. I'll provide a link in the description so you can check out their website. I also ordered specialized LEGO Technic gears, but I'll talk about those later in the video. With the project becoming arm's reach away, I finally felt like the mechanism was getting close to being feasible. Or that was until I got the part. The part unfortunately had some printing errors, such as the Technic pinholes not printing right, causing the Technic pins to be unable to connect right. From what the owner or person that was printing my 3D model told me, is that the model I sent will be very difficult to print due to how it's structured. The person offered to redesign the model for free of charge because they kind of felt bad about sending me a messed up print. Did I ever tell you how much I love this 3D printing service? We emailed each other back and forth until we got something workable. I should also mention, another LEGO gunsmither that I talked to on Reddit also does 3D printing. He redesigned the original model I wanted. The only reason why I didn't use his was because his had structural supports and it would cost me extra for Ready Heart Solutions to remove it. I do still want to give him an honorable mention in this video, and in the future I do want to use his version of the model, mostly because I feel like it would be disrespectful for me not to use his redesign, especially after all the work he put into it. I'll link his and the design I ended up using in the description below. This is the new design for part 1 of the split sling bolt. Just like in the previous version, it has 3 pulleys within that act like a fiddle block. If you notice, on the bottom of each of the walls, there's a Lego Technic beam that has a few 1500 parts attached to it. The reason for this design is so the sling can loop through the bottom of the sling carrier. Now that you know about the second change I made, it's time that I talk about the slider. The slider is located behind the lever of the armature. Just like with part 2 of my split bolt system, it has a string tied from the lever that's attached to the slider with a bolt and nut. I should also mention, the slider had to be redesigned a few times to get the right shape. As you can see, there's a gap on the bottom of the slider. This is where the top part of the spring toggle switch is located. When both parts of the split bolt system hit the lever will push on the slider until the lower part of the spring toggle switch snaps to the right, hitting the limit switch. This will cause the motor to go in reverse, and just like I said earlier, the elastic cord will move both parts forward until part 2 will pull on the string attached to the lever, which will then pull on the string attached to the slider. This motion will move the slider, which will then move the top part of the spring toggle switch, which will then cause the lower part of the spring toggle switch to snap to the left, which will then restart the process over again. These 4 mechanisms working together is what allows the weapon to be fully automatic. The gear system is an interesting story. When I was testing the second prototype, I used a drill hooked up to the gear system when I wanted to make sure that everything worked properly. And I noticed something weird, something bizarre, something strange. Okay, so when I hooked up the drill to the gear system, it worked perfectly. But as soon as I hooked it up to the actual motor of the gun, it will have trouble moving the split bolt system. At first, I thought it was a power issue, so I got a larger power source, and it did help a little bit, but not much. So I wanted to know why. Why does it work perfectly with the drill, but not with the built-in motor? What secrets is the great homicide keeping from me? I discovered within the cordless drills lies a planetary gear system. I'm not going to bother explaining how and why this gear system works. I feel like there's better YouTubers out there that are a bit smarter than my smooth brain self that can explain it better than me. I will tell you, however, how mine works. I built a gearbox cage that has 2 gears that are connected as one big gear piece with a axle. Each of the sides of the gearbox cage has one of these big gear pieces. In the middle on one side of the gearbox cage, there's a gear with a Technic axle that's attached to a gear reduction system. On the other side of the gear cage box is a gear with a Technic axle attached to it. However, this axle is the spool that brings both parts of the split bolt system back. With that out of the way, it's time to talk about the gear reduction system that's attached to the planetary gear system. When I was testing the gear system, I noticed the gears would lift up and cause the gears to loosen and not grab each other. To solve this issue, I bought specialized 3D printed Technic gears. These gears are designed to have better grip and be more durable. I'll link the 3D print files in the description below, and maybe use the 3D print services that we're talking about. I mean, I'm just saying. I should also mention, I designed a back piece to keep everything sturdy and to benefit the motor. You'll get what I mean here in a moment. Another change I made for the design is the motor placement. You see, in the last design, the motor was facing up, but in this design, the motor is facing towards the back of the weapon. This helps to decrease the bulky look of the weapon. I should also mention, I was able to hold in the motor in place thanks to a bolt that's been threaded through a Lego Technic piece and a nut and some washers to the motor. I also made a special custom casing for the motor. The case that holds the motor is essentially a layer of poster board paper that's been wrapped around the motor. I then layered super glue and more poster board paper on top of the first layer. This makes a hardened structure. When the desired shape was finally formed, I then sandwiched the top part of the motor case between two Lego Technic bricks that are held together with Lego Technic pins. After that, I then drilled the correct size holes into the top part of the casing, using the Technic holes as guides. This ensures that the holes are at the correct distance apart. That way I can use Lego Technic axles to hold the casing in place. The electrical system is literally the same as the previous version. I'm not going to bother explaining it because I literally explained it in previously made videos. So check them out if you're curious. The only thing that really changed is the battery box design. It is slightly different, but not really. It's still the same as my previous version. How I made it is the same as how I made the motor casing, except this one has a long piece made up of Technic beams. This long piece has been glued within the battery box, that way I can attach it to the bottom front of the gun. A noteworthy feature of the battery box is that the wiring is done on the inside of the box and wired to a B7 plug to make it easier for connecting and disconnecting the battery. Oh wait a sec, there was one more thing I did change. The limit switches kept shorting out due to the high current of the LiPo batteries, so I did end up changing out the switches for more beefier ones. The only downside was that they were a bit too wide. I did solve this by trimming the plastic tops off. This was so that the armature can move with ease over the limit switches. I also gave the same treatment to the switch that's the main trigger. For those who don't know, it's pretty much the switch that turns on everything. With all that said, I will call this weapon a good success.
Why is it madness? Aren't you forgetting something?
No?
Roll the clip.
Okay, the weapon was still in need of some, improvements. When I was testing it with the drill, it showed some serious promising results. However, when the split bolt system was being moved by the built-in motor, part 2 of the split bolt system will be moving so fast that it will cause the projectile to go over the trigger. This is because the guide rails are just a bit too high, causing the roof of part 2 to be raised just enough for the projectile to slip by. Another issue is the motor itself. The weapon uses a brushed motor, not a brushless motor, a brushed motor. And some of you are probably thinking, okay, so what's the difference? Well, a brushed motor uses carbon brushes to make contact with a rotating commutator, which then delivers an electrical current to the motor rotor windings. A brushless motor, however, uses magnets and electromagnets to create mechanical energy. The problem is that the middle part of the brushless motor, aka the commutator, cannot have any physical pressure put on it, and that, my fellow infected psychopaths, lies the problem. The middle part of the motor is attached to the gear reduction system, and well, I don't know about you, but when something looks like a stalk, I tend to put my shoulder against it. I did solve this issue though by making that back piece you see before you, but I still say the brushless motor would be better. The only problem is that it's just too strong. When I was testing it, it literally caused the gun to break itself apart. I do want to use it, however, but if I do, it will be in another version of this gun. As for why my latest attempt at filming the model exploded on me, well, I do have a theory on why it did that. Remember the lever armature I mentioned? Well, I think I stuck the pins non-parallel from each other. So when the split bolt parts move all the way back, it caused the weapon to get jammed. But it jammed so hard that caused the weapon to basically break itself apart. So, this was less of the gun design fault, if more just my stupid ass not checking if everything was properly built before filming. Whoopsie. With that said, I wouldn't call this prototype a complete failure. Let's think about this for a sec. The first one had something of an idea. It was less of a working prototype and more of a concept. My second attempt, however, was better. It was about 60% there. This one though, I would say it was at least 90% to success. The weapon does need to be rebuilt, but it only needs minor tweaks. Plus, it won't be like before where I'm like, how the hell do I make it work? I do have some ideas though, like making the gearbox smaller with some specialized gears. I think I can make the gearbox smaller and maybe not even have to use a planetary gear system. And maybe make something that reinforces a spool reel. The last one I had a hard time keeping the spool reel from moving out, but that's a project for another day. I got a few other weapons I want to experiment, showcase, and shoot. But with that said, that's all time we have today for this class of Arsenal. Make sure to like and subscribe. Also, hit or shoot the notification bell. Also, be sure to check out my other videos. Until next time, see you later, you psychopaths.